My name is Victoria Hayes, and for 18 years I've been the Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending at First National Bank, one of the most prestigious financial institutions in the city. I've approved over $2 billion in loans during my career, from small business startups to major corporate acquisitions. What most people don't know is that I deliberately maintain a modest public profile, driving a reliable Honda Civic and shopping at department stores rather than boutiques. In my experience, understated competence opens more doors than flashy displays of wealth, and it certainly reveals more about people's true character. The invitation to the Riverside Country Club's annual charity gala had arrived 3 weeks ago, forwarded by my colleague Jennifer, whose husband was a member. The club had a reputation for exclusivity that bordered on the ridiculous, but the cause was worthy, raising funds for the Children's Hospital where my niece had received life-saving treatment 2 years earlier. I'd written a substantial check and looked forward to a pleasant evening supporting a good cause. Saturday evening found me standing in the club's marble-columned foyer, surrounded by the kind of old-money opulence that screamed tradition and exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over women in designer gowns and men in perfectly tailored tuxedos. The air hummed with conversation about vacation homes in the Hamptons, yacht club memberships and private school admissions. I smoothed my navy cocktail dress, elegant but off the rack, and made my way toward the registration table. "Good evening," I said to the volunteer manning the check-in desk. "Victoria Hayes. I should be on the guest list." The young woman, probably a member's daughter earning community service hours, scanned her tablet with manicured nails. "Here you are, Ms. Hayes. Welcome to Riverside Country Club. The cocktail reception is in the grand ballroom, and dinner will be served at 8. I thanked her and followed the flow of guests toward the ballroom, where servers in crisp white uniforms circulated with champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. The room was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked perfectly manicured golf courses, while oil paintings of the club's founders gazed down from gilded frames. I accepted a glass of champagne and found a spot near the silent auction tables, genuinely interested in bidding on a weekend at a mountain resort. "Excuse me." The voice behind me carried the unmistakable tone of authority mixed with irritation. I turned to see a tall man in his 50s approaching, his silver hair perfectly styled and his tuxedo clearly bespoke. His face wore the expression of someone accustomed to immediate compliance with his wishes. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Preston Whitmore, club president." "Victoria Hayes," I replied, extending my hand with a polite smile. "Thank you for hosting such a lovely event. The cause is certainly worthy." Preston's handshake was perfunctory, his eyes already scanning me with obvious disapproval. "Hayes, I don't recall that name on our membership roster. Are you here as someone's guest?" "I'm here to support the charity," I said evenly, sensing the direction this conversation was heading. "My colleague Jennifer Martinez's husband is a member. I believe she mentioned I'd be attending." "Ah yes, the Martinez family." Preston's tone suggested this explained everything in his mind. "Well, I'm sure their intentions were good, but there seems to have been some confusion about our guest policies." I raised an eyebrow, taking a measured sip of champagne while studying his expression. The subtle condescension was unmistakable, wrapped in the kind of polite language that wealthy people used to maintain plausible deniability. "What kind of confusion?" Preston glanced around the room as if ensuring we weren't being overheard, then leaned slightly closer. "Ms. Hayes, I'm sure you're a perfectly nice person, but Riverside Country Club maintains certain standards. Our charity events are intended for members and their appropriately positioned guests." The words hung between us like a gauntlet thrown down. I could feel the attention of nearby guests, conversations becoming quieter as people sensed the tension developing. A woman in pearls and an elaborate updo pretended to examine auction items while obviously listening to every word. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by appropriately positioned," I said quietly, maintaining eye contact despite the flush of anger beginning to warm my cheeks. Preston's smile was thin and practiced, the kind perfected through years of delivering unwelcome news with superficial courtesy. "What I mean is that our events attract a very specific clientele. Business leaders, successful entrepreneurs, established professionals. People who understand the expectations that come with this environment." He paused, letting his gaze travel deliberately from my department store dress to my modest jewelry to my simple black pumps. I'm sure you work very hard at whatever you do, but frankly, I don't think this is the right venue for someone of your background. The woman with pearls gasped audibly. Several other guests had stopped pretending to ignore our conversation, turning to watch what was clearly becoming a public spectacle. I noticed a few exchanging glances that mixed embarrassment with morbid curiosity. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, keeping my voice level despite the humiliation burning in my chest, "are you asking me to leave? I'm suggesting that perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a different type of fundraising event. Something more suited to your circumstances." Preston's voice carried just enough volume to ensure our audience could hear every word. "Riverside Country Club has a reputation to maintain, and we simply don't accept members of your caliber." The silence that followed was deafening. The woman in pearls looked mortified on my behalf. A younger couple nearby seemed frozen with second-hand embarrassment. Even the servers had slowed their circulation, sensing the dramatic tension rippling through the room. I set my champagne glass on the nearest table with deliberate care, my hands steady despite the rage coursing through my veins. 18 years of managing difficult clients and navigating corporate politics had taught me the power of controlled responses. "I completely understand your position," I said quietly. Preston looked satisfied, as if he'd handled an unpleasant but necessary duty with appropriate dignity. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. The club's reputation depends on maintaining our standards." I nodded once, picked up my purse and walked toward the exit with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear the gradual resumption of conversation, probably speculation about what had just transpired. The volunteer at the registration table looked confused as I passed, clearly wondering why I was leaving so early. The valet retrieved my Honda Civic with professional courtesy, though I noticed his slight surprise at the modest vehicle. As I drove home through the city's tree-lined streets, Preston Whitmore's words echoed in my mind. "We don't accept members of your caliber." The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Almost. That weekend I did something I rarely did outside of work hours. I reviewed files. Specifically, I pulled the loan application that had been sitting on my desk for the past 2 weeks, waiting for final approval. Whitmore Construction and Development had applied for a $15 million commercial loan to finance their expansion into luxury residential properties. The preliminary review had been positive. The company showed strong financials and solid projections for growth. What I hadn't paid much attention to before was the name of the company president, Preston J. Whitmore. Monday morning found me in my corner office on the 32nd floor of First National Tower, reviewing Preston's application with fresh eyes. The irony was exquisite. The man who'd dismissed me as unworthy of his country club's standards was seeking approval for the largest loan of his company's history. According to the documents, his entire expansion plan hinged on securing this financing within the next 10 days. My assistant knocked on the door frame. "Victoria? The loan committee meeting for the Whitmore application is scheduled for Wednesday. Do you want me to prepare the presentation materials?" "Actually, let me handle the preparation myself," I said, opening Preston's file. "And please call Mr. Whitmore's office. Tell them I'd like to schedule a face-to-face meeting to discuss some details before we proceed to committee. Of course. Anything specific I should mention?" "Just that it's standard procedure for loans of this magnitude. The senior reviewing officer likes to meet all applicants personally." Tuesday afternoon, my assistant buzzed the intercom with barely contained excitement. "Victoria, Mr. Whitmore's assistant just called." She sounded quite frantic. "Apparently he needs to move up the meeting. Something about a deadline with his investors." I smiled, checking my calendar. "Tell her I can see him first thing tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock sharp." Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I prepared for what would undoubtedly be an interesting conversation. I dressed carefully in my most authoritative business suit, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe that conveyed both professionalism and power. My corner office overlooked the city's financial district, floor-to-ceiling windows providing a commanding view that reminded visitors exactly where they stood in the hierarchy of economic influence. At 8:55, my assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Victoria, Mr. Whitmore is here for his appointment. Send him in." The door opened and Preston Whitmore strode in with the same confident bearing he displayed at the country club. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase, his silver hair perfectly styled and his manner radiating the self-assurance of someone accustomed to getting his way. His smile was broad and professional as he approached my desk. The smile died the instant he recognized me. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," I said pleasantly, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please have a seat. I'm Victoria Hayes, Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending. I'll be reviewing your loan application." Preston's face went through the same fascinating progression I'd witnessed in similar situations: confusion, disbelief, fear, and finally a desperate attempt to regain composure. He stood frozen in my doorway, his briefcase suspended in his grip as if he'd forgotten he was holding it. "Miss Hayes. What are you doing here?" "I'm conducting a loan review meeting," I said, opening his file and spreading the contents across my mahogany desk. "Please sit down. We have quite a bit to discuss." Preston moved like a man walking through quicksand, each step deliberate and uncertain. He lowered himself into the chair across from me, his eyes never leaving my face as if I might disappear if he looked away. "I don't understand," he said finally. You work here?" "I've been Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending at First National for 8 years, I replied, consulting his application. "Before that, I spent 10 years in corporate finance. I've been with the bank for 18 years total." I looked up at him with the same professional courtesy I extended to all loan applicants. "Now, about your expansion project. $15 million is a substantial commitment. Let's review your qualifications." The color drained from Preston's face as the full implications of the situation became clear. His voice came out as barely a whisper. "You're reviewing my loan?" "I am the senior loan officer for all commercial applications over $10 million, I confirmed. "Your application crossed my desk 2 weeks ago. Coincidentally, that was just a few days before our encounter at your country club." Preston sat in stunned silence, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. I could practically see him replaying Saturday night's conversation, each remembered word probably hitting him like a physical blow. "Now then," I continued, turning to the financial projections in his file, "I have some concerns about your cash flow assumptions. The luxury residential market has been volatile lately, and your projections seem rather optimistic." "Ms. Hayes," Preston interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, "about Saturday night. I owe you an apology. I was completely out of line." "Were you?" I asked mildly, not looking up from his documents. "You said the club doesn't accept members of my caliber. I assume you meant people in my profession aren't suitable for your establishment." "No, that's not what I meant at all. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know who you were." I set down his file and leaned back in my chair, studying his face with the same analytical attention I gave all financial documents. "That's exactly the problem, Mr. Whitmore. Your behavior shouldn't depend on someone's net worth or professional status. But since you brought up caliber, let's discuss yours." Preston leaned forward desperately. "Please, I know I was wrong. But surely you won't let a personal disagreement affect a business decision. This loan, my entire expansion depends on it." "You're absolutely right," I said. "Personal feelings have no place in business lending decisions. That's why I'll be evaluating your application based solely on financial merit and character assessment." The word character hung in the air between us like a sword. Preston's face went even paler, if that was possible. "According to your application," I continued, "Whitmore Construction has been in business for 23 years. Generally solid performance, though I noticed some concerning trends in your client retention numbers." I pulled out a specific page from his file. Several former clients cited unprofessional conduct in their feedback surveys. One mentioned feeling that your company looked down on customers who weren't in your social circle. Another said you seemed more interested in networking with wealthy clients than delivering quality service to middle-class families. Preston's mouth opened and closed without sound. Each revelation hit him like a physical blow as he realized the full scope of how his character was being evaluated. "These aren't necessarily disqualifying factors," I said reasonably. "But they do raise questions about your company's long-term viability. In today's market, businesses need to serve all customer segments effectively." "Those are isolated incidents," Preston managed. "A few disgruntled customers who—" "There are 17 separate complaints over the past 5 years," I interrupted, consulting another document. all following similar patterns. Customers feeling dismissed or treated as inferior if they didn't meet certain social standards. Preston slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him as he realized the impossible position he'd created for himself. "What do you need from me?" I closed his file and leaned forward, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I used for serious negotiations. "I need to understand how you plan to address these customer service issues before we commit $15 million to your expansion. Our bank's reputation depends on lending to companies that reflect our values of integrity and respect for all clients." "I'll do whatever it takes," Preston said quickly. "Sensitivity training for all employees, revised customer service protocols, regular satisfaction surveys. Whatever you recommend." "That's a start," I acknowledged. "I'll also want to see evidence of community engagement beyond your country club activities. Pro bono work, affordable housing projects, partnerships with local businesses regardless of their size or prestige." Preston nodded frantically. "Absolutely. We can implement all of that immediately." I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll present your application to the loan committee next week. My recommendation will depend on seeing concrete evidence of these changes, not just promises." As Preston gathered his briefcase with shaking hands, I added, "Oh, and Mr. Whitmore? About Saturday night. I think we both learned something valuable about the importance of treating people with respect, regardless of what we think they can do for us." Preston paused at my office door, his voice barely audible. "I'm truly sorry, Ms. Hayes. You were right to be angry." "I wasn't angry," I corrected. "I was disappointed. There's a difference." 2 weeks later, the loan committee approved Preston's application with conditions. He had to implement the customer service improvements we'd discussed and provide quarterly reports on his company's community engagement activities. The local newspaper ran a story about Whitmore Construction's new partnership with Habitat for Humanity, featuring a quote from Preston about the importance of serving all community members regardless of their economic status. 3 months after that, I received an unexpected invitation. Riverside Country Club was hosting a membership drive for distinguished business professionals in all industries. The invitation was personally signed by Preston Whitmore, along with a handwritten note. "Ms. Hayes, I hope you'll consider joining us. The club would be honored to have someone of your caliber as a member." I smiled as I filed the invitation away. Some lessons once learned seemed to stick. The following Saturday, I attended the club's new community leaders reception, where Preston personally introduced me to the membership committee as one of our city's most accomplished financial professionals. The same woman in pearls who'd witnessed my humiliation 3 months earlier approached me with obvious embarrassment. "Ms. Hayes, I'm so sorry about that evening. If I'd known you were a bank executive." "You shouldn't need to know someone's profession to treat them with respect," I said gently, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. She nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right. Preston's been talking to all of us about that. He says you taught him an important lesson about assumptions." As I mingled with the crowd that evening, I reflected on how the situation had evolved. Preston hadn't just learned to treat me with respect. He genuinely examined his own behavior and made changes that benefited his entire community. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying someone's dreams. It's giving them the chance to become the person they should have been all along, while making sure they understand the consequences of falling back into old patterns. Preston Whitmore learned that character matters more than pedigree, and that true caliber is measured by how you treat people when you think they can't help you. It was a lesson worth $15 million.